And what this tells us, of course, we see it with the Clintons, we see it with the Bushes, we see it with Obama himself. This is a guy who was had never done anything in his life except be a community organizer. He was selected by the elites and put into place just like Dennis Hastert. And so the question about this becomes, and we'll talk about what the charges are, but it's really, he got this cash, they're saying legally. But now he is facing a very long time in prison for cash that he picked up legally. But let's first talk about some of these charges that have come up. There was an interesting find, I think it was The Hill that found this last year on C-SPAN. Dennis Hastert was on talking about his speakership, and it was open lines, and they had this creepy call. This was put out by Drudge. Let's go to that clip right here. Okay, you don't have that clip just yet. Okay, we're gonna go back to that clip. But basically, he was a high school coach, as I mentioned, wrestling coach before he became a politician. Okay, got that clip. Let's run that clip.
Illinois is our next call. Here's Bruce, Independent Line. Hi.
Hello, Danny.
Hey, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Remember me from Yorkville?
Bruce, you're on. Go ahead with your question coming. I think he's gone.
So this
just
guy just calls up
to troll him there.
He just calls up, yeah. You remember me from Yorkville because that's the name of the high school, the town, the high school. Evidently, he was paying this guy, had agreed to pay this individual $3 million, Leanne. And after he paid out about $1.7 million, he stopped. So maybe this guy was kind of firing a shot across the bow at that point. Now we know that there are multiple charges. This was leaked out today by people with the Justice Department, the FBI, the ones investigating this. They called up the LA Times and they were telling them this is allegations of sexual misconduct with children that he had in high school, underage people that he had in high school. And so it's interesting that they're pulling this out and they're shopping this around because that's not what they're going to send him to jail for.
Right.
The statute of limitations has long since gone away. That was 35 years or more because he became a politician in about 1980, 81. So these charges would be 35 years old. There's a statute of limitations. So he's not going to go to jail for that. But they're creating this whisper campaign right now to discredit him and to keep people from asking, why is he going to be going to jail? Because the reason he's going to be going to jail, and that's what we want to talk about, is this structuring charge.
Right.
This is something that he helped to create as part of the Patriot Act. And he's going to be hoisted by his own petard right into jail because it looks like they could get as much as 530 years against him. They're saying they're going to take each of these structuring charges. What he did to pay this blackmailer off, first he took out 15 withdrawals of $50,000. And again, it's his money, okay? But that was reported to the FBI as being something that was suspicious. So they began an investigation. They talked to him and he said, well, I just don't trust the banks. I'm keeping the money. I'm just, it basically wasn't really any of their business why he was taking this money out. At that point, though, he decided he was going to do it secretly. So then he started taking out withdrawals at less than $10,000 so that it wouldn't get noticed, except that he'd already been noticed. So they started monitoring his account. He did that 106 times. For each of those, they say that they're going to charge him up to a maximum of 5 years for each of those accounts. So that would be 530 years. Now, consider this, Leanne. If he had been convicted of sexually molesting a minor, in Illinois, he would have gotten between 6 to 30 years. 530 years for structuring. If he had robbed a bank, because this is his money that he's withdrawing, if he'd gone in and robbed a bank, he would have gotten 6 to 55 years. The upper limit would be if it was armed robbery and he hurt people. Okay. Wow. But for taking out his own cash and not filing the paperwork with the government, this law that he helped to pass could possibly send him to jail for 530 years. And so we have to really ask, when we're looking at this, they're going to try to get you focused on his sexual perversion.
Right. And that's the Department of Justice made the decision to not even include that in the indictment, to specify his past
He had previous bad acts.
Right.
Quote unquote.
But they went around and spent the day putting that in the media's ear that, in quotes, Hastert paid a man to conceal sexual misconduct while the man was a student at the high school where Hastert taught. So they're wanting everyone to just say, oh, throw him in jail. He's a pervert. What an awful person. Where, like you're saying, it's actually what's happening with his own money. Where if you were to, if he was to have decided something like this with his attorney, where they would have paid this person off to not take it to court or something like that. That's perfectly legal.
Yeah.
That's a legal thing to do.
Yeah.
But because he did the structuring process,
yes,
that's
exactly.
where you get into trouble.
Exactly.
Because of the Patriot Act.
Absolutely. And I think it's outrageous that the statute of limitations has run out on the sexual molestation of minors. I don't think there ought to be one. But nevertheless, that's what the law is. But we see that these laws, these structuring laws, they began a long time ago. And they basically have created an entire industry around this. And we're going to talk about what an assistant attorney general said to the anti-money laundering conference. There's an entire industry within the banks. And basically, you need to understand that although you may think that Dennis Hastert deserves this, and he does, he deserves to go to jail for what he's done. He doesn't deserve to go to jail for taking his own cash out of the bank. And you need to understand that if you support that, you're in line to have that done to you as well. We've got a couple of cases just to make it just so that you understand and see how this works out for individuals. Of course, we've had people who get their cash stolen from them constantly when they're stopped on the road by the Highway Patrol. We just had a recent case of a guy who was traveling cross country. He had cash on him. He was going to California to start a new business, and the TSA on the trains confiscated that cash. So that is civil asset forfeiture. Now, that is bad enough. But then it gets even worse with structuring, because what's bad about civil asset forfeiture, they say it's civil, so we don't have to give you due process. We don't have to charge you with a crime. We don't have to convict you in court in a trial. We can just merely say that your property was involved in committing this crime, and we charge your property with criminal action, this inanimate object, and seize that property, or they call it forfeit that property, is the way that they put it. So we see that this has affected people in a variety of ways, but we've seen in North Carolina, just within the last week and a half, 2 cases come to light of one attorney from the Department of Justice that's based in North Carolina going after 2 small businesses and taking all of the money out of their accounts. In one case, it was a convenience store. They took $107,000 out of this man's convenience store. In the other case, it was a business. They'd been in business for 30 years. And because of money that they were withdrawing, they said that it was structured. Very subjective, the way they do this. They said it was structured. They confiscated all of their property. This is the way it's been reported. Now, the first guy, the convenience store owner, Lyndon McClellan, had a bank account for his convenience store. It was seized by the IRS. And at first, he didn't understand why. The IRS said that it suspected that he was violating federal structuring laws. Do you understand that? It suspected. It didn't
he wasn't
find
even charged with the crime.
That's right. They had no evidence. They just suspected that he was structuring deposits. Now, if you've got a convenience store and you're collecting cash, when you deposit the cash, that may not be any criminal intent whatsoever. And they merely look at the amount of money that you put in or the amount of money that you take out, and they subjectively determine that you were trying to avoid going over that $10,000 limit. And of course, if you've got a business, if you're anyone who's ever had a business, you understand if you're dealing in cash, that's not a lot of money. That is a lot of money for us as individuals. It's not a lot of money for a business to do that. Now, this is what the attorney, the federal attorney, U.S. Attorney Steve West said to McClellan. He said, "Don't go public." He said, "This will only make things worse for you." He said, "It just ratchets up feelings within the agency." Get that? In other words, don't make us mad at you. Don't go public because we'll get mad at you. So he says, here's the deal. I'll return 50% of the money, and we'll stop this right now. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. He went public, and the public was outraged about that. They've now returned that money, that $107,000 to him, which basically would put him out of business. That was his entire bank account that he had for his business. Then we find a few days later, the same U.S. attorney, Steve West in North Carolina, going after another small business. This is a small business out of Raleigh, North Carolina, Tom Bednar and his wife. They said they had a bank account for their 3-decade-old business, 30 years old, Marla Enterprises. They were amazed to find that the bank account was empty. The bank called them and wanted to know how they were going to cover $18,000 in outstanding checks that they had written. So you have to understand the cash flow involved in a business, the amount of money is much larger than you're going to see as an individual. That's why $115,000 is not that much. They just wrote $18,000 worth of checks. Now, in this case, it wasn't the IRS, it was the Secret Service that seized the money, but it was done by the same U.S. attorney. He said, we got no warning, nothing at all. And so this guy did the same thing to them. Again, he said, I'll give you back half of it. And they said, no, we don't owe anything. We didn't commit a crime. We didn't do anything. And he said, okay, I'll give you all of it back except for $10,000. And they said, absolutely not. This is what he had to say. This is what the business owner had to say. He said, my wife and I have run a business our entire lives. It's hard-earned, legitimate money. Why should I give it up and let it be stolen from us, whether it's $1 or $100? Exactly right. He committed no crime. This is a criminal government, and this is the kind of government that Dennis Hastert created. Right. That is still with us, that is still abusing everybody. And then get this, even though they have had some minor reforms of this, they had a Civil Asset Forfeiture Reform Act that was just recently passed. Under that, these people who have had charges made against them by their banks, they've had legal fees that they've had to go through to try to get their money back that was stolen from them by the U.S. government. These people are entitled to get back $25,000 in legal fees. The government just said, we're not going to do that. I mean, this is the law. This is a law that was passed, Civil Asset Forfeiture Reform Act, that was passed to stop these very kind of abuses from attorneys that work for the U.S. government, like Stephen West in North Carolina. And he just simply says, no, we're not going to obey that law. They pick which laws they want to obey, which ones they don't. They violate the Constitution with all of them, and they're stealing people's money right out of their accounts. It's absolutely
and who they
amazing.
want to come after and prosecute, because obviously the banks are too big to jail. They
Yes.
won't come after them when they're...
Well, and let's understand exactly. That's exactly the point. Look at the largest money laundering case ever, HSBC. They were fined $1.9 billion. Again, that sounds like a lot of money, but not for HSBC. Do you understand how much that fine is? And let me make it clear. HSBC really was engaged in criminal activity. They've come to us and they've said, we need to have this surveillance of your accounts. We need to have this massive system of reporting from the banks spying on you and sending reports to us all the time. We need to have that because this might be you might be doing something, moving cash around to launder money for drug cartels or for terrorist groups. HSBC was laundering money for drug cartels, for terrorist groups. There's no question about it. They got caught red-handed. They're the kind of person or kind of entity that this law was written for, trying to stop this. Not for people who are hardworking small businessmen who just happen to be depositing money without any regard, not trying to break the law, not understanding even what the law is, and yet the government takes their entire account. They took $1.9 billion from HSBC. That was less than 1 month's profit for that company. Right. Less than 1 month's profit. If you look at that on an annual basis, that's 8%. That, if you look at that as a tax for them doing business illegally with drug cartels and money launderers, okay, that 8% tax, if you want to call that, the money laundering tax, that's less than their income tax. Of course, they don't pay any income tax anyway, but as less than a corporation would pay, less than an individual would pay. None of you out there are paying 8% income tax. And so they get away with an 8% tax, even though they were guilty as could be with this.
Right. And that's the other thing, is just not pointing out that the real crime should be here with Hastert. He entered in Congress with a net worth of no more than $270,000 and then exited Congress with somewhere between $4 million and $17 million.
Same thing with the Clintons.
That's a crime.
Exactly. Same thing with the Clintons. Same thing with the Obamas. Okay. Of course, Hillary says when she got out of Congress, they were flat broke.
Oh, yeah.
But
so that's why they had to up their speaking fees.
Yeah. That's the real problem. And I don't think you can stop it. See, campaign finance reform isn't going to get there. This is something that these guys are getting after they get elected. The problem is not campaign finance reform, unfortunately. The problem is that there's so much power in Washington that it is a black hole for criminals. Okay, it's a black hole for these type of people like Dennis Hastert, who they know doesn't have much sense. I mean, this is a guy that the FBI's come to him and ask him why he took out $750,000 and $50,000 increments, and he lies about it. And then he starts trying to structure his deposits. And he should know better because he passed the law.
Exactly.
Okay. If he doesn't know what's in the law, maybe he didn't read it after he passed it.
Right.
You know, he didn't do what Pelosi did, right?
Pass it, define it. Yeah.
Yeah. But of all people, he should know what's in it. So he's not a very bright bulb. Okay. But he's somebody who's crooked. He's corrupt, somebody that they can control. Okay. So,
well, and he's obviously been a sociopath and a predator,
Mm-hmm.
you know, from his early days as